Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Dane Brown. I teach cybersecurity over at the Naval Academy. I've been there for a number of years now. Um, we developed a really great one of the nation's very first undergraduate programs in cybersecurity. An actual major that we call the Cyber Operations major, which we built from scratch. And we were the first ones to get accredited for cyber science as an engineering program. So I wanted to come and talk to you guys today about hacker tools and techniques. Right? What are things that, yes, go Navy indeed. Right? What are things that actual hackers use in order to compromise systems, to get a foothold in them, and you know, what do you need to be on the lookout for to protect your business? Now, I don't know way too much about how Hop-In works. I've seen most things just going on as far as text chat, but I'm a teacher. I'm an interactive person, so I'm 100% fine with you guys, turning on your mics or whatever and asking me questions as things come up, and just kind of having a dialogue that way. Otherwise, I'll try to keep my eye on the chat room, and answer anything that comes up. But yeah, please feel free. I want this discussion to go where you want it to go, because I know about the stuff I'm going to talk about already, and I'm interested in diving into the things that you would find interesting. Yes, and if you are looking at a tiny presentation screen, you can just double click on the presentation and it should become bigger in your window. All right. So with that, I will get into this. All right, hacker tools and techniques. All right, good. Looks good. All right, so as far as your businesses, your small businesses, your startups, why are they at risk? The unfortunate fallacy is that they're too small to be targets. That's actually not the case, right? There are companies that don't have a lot of experience, that don't have a mature cybersecurity program, are generally kind of easier targets, right? They become kind of this low-hanging fruit, and in aggregate, you could get a lot. You have a lot to gain from compromising, a lot of these companies en masse, right? So even though you might be small and the attackers, aren't targeting you specifically, they could still come after you, because if they can get a little bit out of your business, if they can get some ransomware onto your systems and even get a small payout, and they are able to do that to hundreds or thousands of companies, right? That becomes a valuable proposition for them in the long run, right? Also, as your small business, you don't invest enough time and resources into security in many cases. It's not that you don't want to, or that you don't care about security, but maybe just with a couple people in a startup, you don't have someone there yet who's a security expert and has that expertise. And the honest truth is, you're probably putting the effort into getting your company off the ground, right? Into getting operations and getting to profitability, right? Rather than thinking about those long tail problems of things like security and protecting your business. Okay. So with that said, right, how do attackers come after your systems? I'm going to talk about the phases of these attacks, right? And I'm going to talk about maybe about 6 phases here, and then what my plan is to do that, and then go through a small case study with you, and hopefully leave enough time to answer questions, right? if there aren't questions that come up as I go along. So the first phase, right, is called reconnaissance, right? This is our passive phase. This is where an attacker is trying to set up the attack, right? So you're using this time to gather information about your target, right? Of course, I'm sure you've all seen heist movies before, right? And you have this long movie telling the whole story of how they get in and do the heist, but it never starts with them just banging down the door and pointing guns at everybody, right? There's an extensive planning phase, and they have to think about, okay, here, what is the security like, and who's going to be on duty this day, right? So you have to do this reconnaissance in order to really increase your chances of Yes, there's levels to this stuff, right? You got to do this reconnaissance to increase your chances of success when you actually are in the execution phase. Right? So now, reconnaissance is also, this is for mature attackers, right? When you know what to look for, or you know what kind of plan you're going for. But again, not everyone's going to do this, right? If it's just targets of opportunity, if there's low hanging fruit, if you just have easily compromised interfaces available to the internet, those are going to get attacked whether someone has done extensive planning or reconnaissance on you or not. Right, so the best thing you can do is to not leave the low-hanging fruit out there, right? At least do the very basics, the most often recommended things about patching your systems, closing down ports, and so forth. Right, and also wide-scale attacks, right? Sophisticated attackers might do wide-scale attacks where they're just, it's not about you. It's how many systems, right? It's quantity over quality. How many systems and businesses can I compromise and get little bits from? So what are some tools? How is reconnaissance done? You've seen it in the physical world with the guy sitting in the car taking pictures, watching how operations are going in a particular business, right? But there's open source information that's out there. Okay, there are just so many places where data is these days, right? I mean, you're even seeing, right? I think we have one of the tracks is generally dedicated to data science and machine learning and AI, right? This trend is due to the amount of data that's just available, right? Publicly available and accessible to anyone in the world, and there are people who are trying to make sense of it, right? If the people who are doing that in the hacking world are using this kind of open source intelligence, taking the data that's out there and seeing how it can all be correlated to you, right, or to your company to help gather information for launching an attack, right? How can I get information about who the people are that work for you, what passwords or access codes and whatnot might be? You'd be surprised how much data is just sitting out there on different websites or in case studies or in communications you've had for tech support or with vendors or anything like that. Social media is obviously huge, right? So there's new big social networks every day, and you can see what's going on with like TikTok and all that now. But we've had Facebook forever, Twitter. People are constantly posting information, and there's just, by and large, very little regard to the privacy and the ramifications of having posted that information and how people could put together. If someone's observing what you're posting over a long period of time, how they could put together a story, a narrative that can help them, gain more insight into what you might think of as a password or username and what kind of systems you use on a regular basis. Right, your public website for your company, that's something you have to be thinking about. Some things might be behind a password login, but there's some of the most famous ones are there's places where you tell search engines not to scan, right? Because Google and Yahoo, all these search engines are continually scanning the internet, so they're looking at all the pages on your site so they can index them, right? And so if you're not thinking consciously about, hey, you intentionally tried to make a page private, it could wind up in one of those indexes, and someone could find it in a search result. You could also tell those search engines to leave those results out, right? There was, I'm not sure how antiquated this is at this point, but I think it's still used, right? There's, for a website, you can have a robots.txt, right, at the top level of your site that can tell search engines like Google, hey, don't index, these particular pages. But what's the problem with that? It's itself a public web page, right, in your site. So anyone can actually just type in robots.txt on your website and see which things you don't want the search engines to check out. And obviously, any intelligent attacker is going to go directly to those pages. All right. Yeah, and so there's just other ways as well, right? The domain name system is a way of getting information, right? This is how whatever your company name is, right? mycompany.com, that's your domain name, right? You have to register that, and you have to give a lot of information most of the time publicly, unless you pay more information to hide it, about your company, where you're located, who's working for you in IT, and so forth, right? So that's information that people can pull down pretty easily. Don't forget about things like social engineering, right? You might just be asked some information, right? Somebody could come up and have a conversation with you or one of your employees that's seemingly friendly, but really they're probing for stuff, right? Things that they could potentially use later on in a later phase of an attack. The next phase is called scanning, right? So once you've gotten some of that initial information, right, you have kind of an idea of what kind of how your target is laid out, and kind of how they conduct business. You want to then see, okay, where might they possibly be vulnerable within the network? Okay, and so this is where we move into an active phase, right? You don't have to in the previous phase, right? When you're just doing that footprinting, you don't have to actually make any contact, right? You don't have to give yourself away that you're performing an attack or you're going to perform an attack. Scanning is where you start moving into that active, okay, I'm going to reach out and touch some of their systems, right? I could be detected doing this, right? So as an attacker, you kind of want to be careful with this, but there are lots of ways to do scanning, right? And in fact, not all scanning is even malicious, so it may not set off alarm bells, right? So you want to check for potentially vulnerable ingress points, right? Which computers do they have? Which systems are publicly available that I could reach, right? How many are there? And what's running on them? You can do this scanning, in technological means, like I'm talking about here, using some of these scanners. But obviously, you can do this socially as well. I just talked about social engineering, and you can work people, right, and ask them questions for this information, or trick them into divulging specific information about the company and how things are laid out. And then there's physical scanning, right? So don't forget your company, as far as security goes, you have to not just protect yourself on the technology side. You also have to protect the physical parts of your company, right? You might have a building, right? And you have to think about how people can gain access to it, right? Are you locking all the doors? Are there proper access controls, right? Security in the right places, cameras. Okay. And so, in the scanning phase, you'd be looking for that, right? What does this company have, right? Do they have cameras? Are they on and recording, right? Where are the security guards? What are their rotations like? So, you checking doors, right? One thing that's interesting that people don't recognize, when you go to hacker conventions, it's not just all computer hacking stuff. They always, every single one I've been to, has a whole booth, or maybe even a whole room set up for lock picking, right? It's like a huge thing in hacker culture, because you're not going to get everywhere just by launching exploits. It might be just gaining access to a particular room, that didn't have a great lock that you can pick, that can get you like 50% of the way to your objective. Right, so what are some of the tools that can help us with scanning? All right, the king of this is Nmap. Right, that is the network mapping school, for which I believe it's over 20 years old at this point. So this will scan the network to find the different hosts that are available on it. You could then also scan, when you find different hosts or computers that exist, you can now scan for ports, right? So computers, network computers have up to 65,000 or so ports that might be available. Most of them should be closed, and only have ones open that are running a particular service that are meaning to do so, and that are secured properly. Right? You should be watching those different ports. So the way that comes up is like if you have a server, that's a web server. That's how people access your business's website. So you have generally port 80 for that if it was in the older unencrypted days, but now port 443. But you'd have one or both of those two ports open. And so people could tell then, okay, this computer is probably running a web server, and then I can use my browser, I can use other tools to kind of interact with that and see how that works, what version of it, and so forth. Wireless networks, right? You definitely don't want to forget this, right? You could put a whole lot of effort into securing your networks, having monitoring and whatnot. But if you are allowing your employees and if you're doing business through using Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, all of those need to be properly secured too, right? Because now someone doesn't even have to be necessarily on premises to try to plug into that network, right? They can be standing outside, but by some range. In fact, they can use there's range extenders for those kind of technologies that can allow them to launch the attacks from maybe sometimes up to miles away to try to connect to your network wirelessly. Right, so you definitely want to know what your surface area for risk is there. Okay, as far as physical, right, with scanning, we just kind of talked about this, but checking those entries and what are the access patterns, right? When are people working? What are the shifts that employees are taking, right? And so social engineering there as well. Do you guys have any questions so far? I don't know if I'm going through this too fast or too slow. Kind of just a few more, and hopefully this is all ringing a bell. There's so many tools, right, that I can't even name them all specifically, and they're all, many of them are kind of like tailor-made things, right? Nmap is very commonly going to be used for doing this kind of scanning stage, and it actually has a lot of capabilities to it. But there's also things for like social engineering. We say it's just talking to people, but there's things like Altigo and Social Engineers Toolkit out there where you can be kind of aggregating the data you're finding from not only technical places but also in those social kind of interactions to help you figure out what you're going to use for launching your attack. How does one detect the use of scanning tools? Great. So that's just something you can do in network monitoring and logging, right? So if you have your IDS set up, and anytime a scan happens, right, this is there's an actual connection that's being made. So like for instance, like a website. Anytime someone visits your website, your server software is collecting logs on that, right? And you can see exactly what happened. Was there an error, right? Was it a properly formatted request? Were they using a real browser, or were they using some like command line tool that just makes kind of these quick one-off connections to it? So those are all things you can be logging, right, and be monitoring for. Absolutely. Are we able to, and how can we connect with you following this presentation? Okay, I'll have contact information definitely at the end of this. Can you recommend an online course to become familiar with these techniques? Yeah, definitely. So the honest truth is, right, I know there's courses that you can go pay for, but there's a lot you can learn just on things like YouTube, right? I mean, there are content creators that are putting out just amazing like walkthroughs of how to use certain tools and certain skill sets. Like whenever I'm doing something new, right? If it's I hear about some new tool or technique or something like that, I don't go to go find a course. I just go I type it into YouTube and I see, hey, who's made a video of showing this, and can I take that and then replicate it on my own machine and get up and running from there. That said, there are really great resources out there. So there's things like, one, your local community colleges and whatnot usually have some physical courses you can go to and learn some of these. There's online sites like Coursera and edX and Udacity that have these going on, right? I follow people like the Cyber Mentor has a course on this, and just getting up and started. I'm actually working with one of my former students who started something called Hopper's Roppers, right? For Grace Hopper, the new building we have at the Naval Academy, and so that's a place to train people from zero up to hero, and I think most of the things on that site itself are free. So I would check out Hopper's Roppers. I'll actually type that down here. You can see how that's spelled. Awesome. Good questions. All right. The next phase after the scanning is going to be enumeration. Right. So now that you know what the different hosts are that you could connect to, maybe what ports they have open, the types of services they might be running, you want to get more information now, right? Which is the services that are, like, specifically what service is running on that port, right? Is it a web server? Is it a FTP server, right? Is it a remote desktop or something of that nature? And then you want to figure out things like, what version is it running? You know, is it some outdated version from 5 years ago that there are like 100 exploits on the web for? Or is it patched and at the most up-to-date version, right? A lot of these things will just tell you when you make a request what version is being run. You also want to find things like information about people, right? What accounts? Okay, so this comes back to some of the social part, things you might find on the website or the internet. You know, if I want to log into this service, right? What kind of account names might I use, and what kind of passwords, access codes might be common for their organization. Okay. So yeah, you focus on known weaknesses and you iterate, right? So a lot of this process, this isn't just kind of this linear thing where it's like, hey, there was step one, right? I did my footprinting, my reconnaissance, and I did my scanning, then I did my enumeration. You might have to do some of these, right? Enumeration, I'm finding more information out. And that might send me back to the beginning. It's like, hey, here's another new system that now I need to scan that new system, right? Get information about it, and then enumerate, what's accessible within it. Right? It's all about painting the most complete picture that you have to give you the best chance of having a successful attack, right? The easiest route to success that's going to be as stealthy as possible. So you're really, you're kind of like ranking and stacking, the possible way that you might proceed as you go along, right? From some noisy, low probability success attack to, I got this information, this is going to help me like fit in and be able to masquerade as a legitimate employee. So those are the kind of things you want to be able to do. Right? How do you do that? So what are some tools and techniques that we could use for enumeration, right? We do that service scanning. We identify versions, and so Nmap helps us do some of this in many cases. But when we get down to like vulnerability scanning, there's a little bit of that in Nmap as well. Actually, I told you it's a really full-featured tool. But there's things like Nessus has been a really popular vulnerability scanner, and it's one that you can just turn on, and it'll scan your whole network, and it'll tell you which things are out of date and whatnot based on its current database. It's funny because I know from a few years ago that was at least really controversial in penetration testing, because you would hire a firm to come and penetration test your systems, and they would just run this scan and give you a 1,200-page report that you may not have known how to do anything with. But that scanner is available to everyone. There's free versions of Nessus, right? And you can at least scan and see, okay, what can an attacker see as easy low-hanging fruit in my network to be able to gain access. On the physical side, right? You want to enumerate employees, right? Who works there? What are their roles? What do they do? What do they have access to? Right? Schedules. When are they there? All that gives you good information about when might be good times to launch your attack, and who's like names you might drop as you're passing the receptionist with the clipboard, pretending to be a maintenance person or something like that, right? You want to seem as legitimate as possible, whether it's a physical attack or whether it's a technical attack. Right? That brings us to the fun part, right? Exploitation. Okay. Now here's where you actually launch your attack. You've gathered all the data that you need to give yourself a great chance of success. Okay. And the important part is your earlier stages, right, should make this a short, right, easy, and very likely to succeed process. Right. That's the whole point of doing those first three parts, right? Yes. So these people are called script kiddies, right? Any kid, whenever you hear about like some 15-year-old kid that like broke into some company and you're thinking they're so smart. That not necessarily the case, right? These tools are there that you can just go download for free on the internet, and you could just indiscriminately launch them at different websites or different companies, and get lucky. But that doesn't say that you're going to have a very good likelihood of that happening. And maybe that kid tried 100 or 500 different places before they got into one. So our process up to this point was about finding, hey, what do I know will work for this particular organization that is the target. And as you're doing this, you also want to be stealthy, right? You should attempt to avoid detection, right? These companies are going to have things like antivirus, possibly intrusion detection systems. That's what IDS is, and intrusion prevention systems. That's what IPS is. They should be taking logs and monitoring them, right? This is the common problem, actually, right? There's lots of tools that generate logs. You guys can't see my mouse, can you? I'm here pointing things out with my mouse, and I'm just realizing that you probably can't see that at all. But I might be able to. Oh, I've got the laser pointer. Oh, good. Okay, you can see that. So yes, logs. Companies obviously have a lot of ways that logs get generated, right? Like I just said, even with like web servers. But for that to be useful, it also requires someone to go and look at those logs at some point in time, right? And a log taken that shows you that there's a compromise going on that no one's looking at doesn't help secure your systems or your company at all. Right. Good. And then on the physical side, right? I'm just thinking like things like security guards, right? Because as you're and reception people, just people in your company, just being on alert and about what's going on, right? Should this person who looks like some maintenance worker, should they be accessing our server room, right? Should they be going into that place? Is what's going on fishy in any way? You should always be vigilant and be asking questions like that. What kind of tools can we use for exploitation? There are a million of them, and this depends on your objective, honestly. There might be, you might be looking to just do like denial of service, right? This was big in like the hacktivism days. You may be trying to prove a point and weaken a company or their image. So denial of service is about like taking them offline, right? You can do a denial of service on a website so that the people can't access the website. If customers can't access like an e-commerce site, they lose money, right? People can't buy things there, right? So denial of service could be big. You might also be looking to directly compromise a particular system that has data that you want to get, right? Or be able to, put some ransomware on. You might be trying to compromise the entire network, the domain, and have full control over what's going on in there and be able to move laterally throughout the network and look for juicy systems. You might want to get information, right? You might be looking to get information out of the database. You might be looking to get a dump of the passwords that you can crack and launch further attacks or associate with some information you already have. And so there's things like, I don't know if you've heard of this, there's whole operating systems dedicated to this. There's one called Kali Linux that most hackers know about and have used at least at some point, right? And Kali Linux is something you can put on a USB thumb drive and boot your computer up, right, without having to really even install it. And it just has tools that do everything I've talked about, right? The reconnaissance, the scanning, the exploitation here, right? Enumeration phases, all of these are, and they're like organized, right, into folders, right? Here's the folder for, for scanning tools. And so everyone can just, with little experience or little know-how, you can actually get that up and running and be able to launch some of these tools, right? So that's one of the best things that you can do if you just want to kind of see like what the names of the tools are that are out there that are kind of popular in the space. But you can also, of course, you can make custom things, right? If you know enough about programming and doing that design. And on the physical side for exploitation, like I just said, right? Access to like a server room or a data center. I mean, think about how much stuff is in the cloud now. You might think, hey, it's making our life easier as a business to be moving things to the cloud, but you don't have control over what's physically happening out there with those servers, right? You can't see those people entering your premises. So you're just kind of having to blindly trust that your cloud provider is taking security seriously and doing the right thing, right? And USB, right? Even things like this, right? So on the screen, we're seeing something called the USB rubber ducky. This is by the famous Hack5 crew. They've made kind of a bunch of really neat exploitation devices, and they put information out. They're a good one to actually watch from week in and week out. They've made things like the Wi-Fi pineapple to compromise Wi-Fi networks. But this is this looks like just a regular USB thumb drive, doesn't it? But inside of it, it's got basically this whole microcomputer that is meant to to type in scripted attacks that you have as soon as it gets plugged into a system. So if I'm masquerading myself as some kind of maintenance worker and I go into your server room, I could plug this into one of your systems, and it's going to without me having a keyboard, having to sit there for hours trying to get through your your network and figure things out. This script will automatically run and start sending data back to my collection site on the internet. Okay. I see a couple of comments here. Let's see. How mature are automated log analysis tools? These days, they could be pretty mature, but the important part is, not just the tool itself and the maturity of the tool, but the maturity of the people who are using it. Right? These things are collecting gigabytes and terabytes of data. Right? The tool itself doesn't necessarily know what's important or what's actionable. Right? That takes a human hand. Right? So you need to be looking at, okay, these alerts over here are those are not consistent with our baseline. I wouldn't have expected those. Let me look into that a little bit more. Right? So it's a combination. Right? These tools allow us to see more data than we ever could before, but we need to provide our own human intelligence on top of that to know where to focus in on. Right? And yes, there we go, the Cali 2020 release. Thank you for posting that link in there. All right. Byron Smith. All right. So with emerging technologies in DevOps and DevSecOps, all right. What is my take on organizations migrating to using REST APIs? And I honestly, I can't tell you if I have a specific opinion on that, right? It's definitely a win that organizations have been thinking about security and building it into what was just DevOps, and now thinking about using DevSecOps and kind of doing what I've said is important for a long time, right? Or many in security have said is a long time is building security into your products and into your process. So I think that's obviously a positive overall. Yeah, but that's basically as far as my opinion goes on that, right? I don't necessarily do a lot of I don't really do a lot of development work and operational work on that front end side. So mostly just back on the security back end. But thank you. Let me check the time. 10 minutes. All right. We're almost at the end. So the last couple, all right, one is persistence. All right, once you've gotten that exploit, once you've gotten that foothold into the system itself, you want to be able to maintain that access, right? You might need to come back at a later time, a later date, and you don't want to necessarily go through all the steps you had to gain that initial access. Right? So the other thing is what happens is your initial access method may not be stable. To explain that a little bit, I don't know how many of you have ever written an exploit before, but the connection that you get initially when you first get, we call it, popping a shell, right? Getting a shell access into a system. You're compromising something that was not meant to be compromised, right? That shell you're getting was from a program that was intended to operate in a completely different way. And so it wasn't rigorously, robustly set up for you to do this and have this access to the system. And so that shell is, in many ways, it's kind of like unstable, right? It's fragile. And so you want to, as soon as you can, right, get into, use that access to the system to create something more stable, right? A more stable foothold into that system, into that network, that not only, won't get disconnected, but you can now repeat and connect to again later on, right? In a more, kind of in a more standard way, that won't be an issue, right? And also, the initial way you got in might not be so stealthy, right? We're talking about logs and things coming up in these detection systems, so we want to avoid detection, so that we don't get disconnected, right? If someone finds you in the system, right, they're not going to allow you to keep doing your work and keep analyzing their systems and their network, right? You're going to get kicked out. So even if the way you got in initially wasn't super stealthy, you then want to kind of like migrate to something that looks a lot more innocuous. Right? What are some things that you would have to do to gain this persistence? One, how do you get access to more users' credentials and whatnot? Or you might have to do password cracking. If you get into a system, especially if you are able to be the administrator, right? You can dump the SAM file on Windows or the shadow file on Linux, and then you try to crack more passwords and get access to more accounts with something like John the Ripper, right? Everyone in the hacking community really knows this tool, and there's how do people find out what your password is? Well, there's a bunch of databases that have been breached and stolen that contain usernames and passwords over the years. And so those are kind of the first things. Those get actually put in. Like Kali has the list of like things like the RockU database and many passwords that get used. Right, SecLists has I think a bunch of these as well. So you're just going to try brute forcing your way through and seeing which the passwords in this database that are hashed. I'm not going to really talk about these technologies in detail, right? But if you can see which passwords that already exist in a previous breach line up to those, and that's how you can discover other passwords, right? And as those are passwords that may have more privileges, right? You can do privilege escalation. So if your initial way in was just as some kind of low user that doesn't have access and permissions to really accomplish much within the network, within the system, then you want to become like the administrator, right? On Linux systems, that would be root, right? Or the administrator on Windows systems, domain admin for Microsoft networks, right? And that allows you to do lateral movement, right? You can log in on any of the systems where that account exists, right? You can do these kind of pass the hash attacks where you don't have to necessarily log in and find credentials system to system. The main thing you want to do is have this backdoor. I've talked about that a couple of times. Once you've gotten in, through your exploit, through whatever your technique was, you want to find a way to make it easy to come back, right? And that could be creating yourself an account or just having an administrator password or something like that, so you can do a standard, normally authenticated login and look like a regular user. There's also things like rootkits that you would set up on a system that they kind of are embedded more into the operating system, and they change the way certain programs work and run and interact, right? The authentication might be changed to just allow your backdoor password, so nothing else looks different to the standard users or the people monitoring the system. But whenever you run the login program, it allows your bogus password that you set that rootkit to allow, right? And then there's things like remote administration tools, right? That you can use for access. And a lot of these are legitimate, right? There's like LogMeIn and TeamViewer and whatnot, even just remote desktop that Microsoft has. But getting the wrong person access to those, right, it gives them that same ability to provide remote help for your system from wherever they are. Okay, And again, that looks legitimate, and they have access to do whatever they want to do remotely. Right. So the last thing an attacker might be interested in doing is covering up their tracks. Right. The primary goal here being stealth. You want to have access for as long as possible. Right. Whether you want to carry out future attacks or whether you're not really doing the attack yet. Sometimes attackers get access to a network and they just lie dormant for weeks or months, right, as they're planning the attack and they're gathering more information about what the internals of the network are and how business is done, right? So the primary goal there is stealth, right? Keeping yourself not detected so that you can continue having access to the network, right? And then the secondary goal being like disassociation, right, from you, right? So it's even if the attack itself is found, that they can't associate that to you, right? To your group or to you personally, that's doing this attack, right? It just gets cut off, and no consequences for you. And now you can maybe start thinking about how to work in from another angle and continue your work, right? So you want to have that plausible deniability, destroy evidence that exists on the system, and if necessary, keep point fingers away from you. Ways to do this, again, we talked about logs on a system that may or may not be monitored, but if you can modify those logs or get rid of them entirely, right? Modifying them is probably a stealthier thing to do because, no logs is kind of suspicious. Hiding files. Several operating systems allow you ways to have files that live on a system that, don't come up in ordinary views. You can have like these dot files in Linux, right? And then there's these other kind of there's these special paths that live in Windows that allow you to that don't show up in the normal file listing even on Windows. You can try removing history so that they don't see the commands that you ran on the system once you got in. Windows has this thing called alternate data streams. I'm not so sure if they still have it, right? It's been available for many, many years. So you could have something that a file that looks pretty innocuous, but those files actually can hold additional data within them, right? If you put on the right kind of extension that goes along with it, and read that data out in that same way. So you can hide data within these systems. You can also use covert channels. This happens a lot with especially things like network protocols, where you can hide data in that protocol, even like sending data to a website or TCP, IP packets can hold a little bit of extra like metadata in them that you can use as covert channels if people aren't looking for the data that's being sent there. Okay. And then that kind of goes along with this concept of something called steganography, which is hidden writing, which are you can put you can hide data in things like files, inside pictures. You might be looking at a picture on the internet that someone has exchanged, and you might be able to grab data out of the least significant bits of that, and be able to decode a message, right? So there's actually pretty interesting ways of getting that done. Let me see how much time I got. Oh, okay, not too bad. So Byron's got a question. Anyone looking for opportunities at M&T Bank? Should be interested. Okay. I don't know if that was a question. All right, so I'll try to quickly, since we have like 1 minute left, go through this case study. One of the most famous ones is Target, where you can kind of trace going through the phases I just talked about. Back in 2013, right, there was 110 million credit card holders that were compromised. It was basically, I think it might have been the largest data breach at that time, right? 11 gigabytes of data in total were stolen, and the attackers were in the network for 3 weeks nearly before being detected. And the compromise came through their third-party HVAC. Okay. Right. So reconnaissance in this case, there was actually an existing case study on the Microsoft website. So Microsoft had some, like a case study of like how Target was using their technology, and it spelled out like all these things that Target was using with Microsoft. Right. There's like their virtualization software, how they were doing name resolution, even their the manager they were using for doing patches and updates. So like a treasure trove of information about how Target conducted business internally. Right. This also had information about their point of sale systems, right, which we know is that kind of the end point of this compromise. Right. Scanning. Right. these lists online, you were able to look for their supplier portal. So their supplier portal was something you could actually just do a search for, right? You could Google search and find who are their suppliers that provide these third-party services. And with that, you only needed to find really one vendor that had the vulnerability, and this third party having access into Target's networks to be able to do their their analysis remotely. Right. So enumeration here, picking all these out, they found one company among possibly many others, but this was Fazio Mechanical that does like refrigeration work. So they gathered information on the employees there and their email system, and it was enough to generate successful phishing email, right? So, I didn't really talk about this earlier, but one of the primary ways that sites, that companies, organizations are exploited is through phishing, right? And hopefully you guys have all heard of that in your security training at work. But you got to be careful about what emails you open and clicking on attachments, links, things like that, right? Or you could fall victim to a phishing scam, which is what did in this vendor. After having clicked on that, right, the exploit was Citadel, which is malware that was this modified version of the Zeus banking Trojan. And also it was reported that, so that was into Fazio's system, but then later on within Target system, the access they had, they actually did further compromises, reportedly through some of their web applications that were vulnerable and targeting their SQL databases inside. How did they get this persistence, right? I said they were in their network for 3 weeks. Honestly, for a big company, that's bad. But you'd be surprised. Some of these small organizations, it's not uncommon to hear that the attackers had access for 3 months or 6 months or more. And then they get notified externally by maybe the FBI or something that that something was wrong because there's malicious traffic coming out of their network, right? So they never even notice. But yeah. So that Citadel malware sat on the network of this vendor, Fazio, and collected valid login credentials. With that, they could have legitimate access, and so they used their foothold as a third party to pivot into the Target network through one of their portals, and grabbed Active Directory logins for the vendor systems, and combined that with, like I said, web application attacks. And that's how they escalated privileges, right? How they became more privileged in the Target network to gain access to whatever they were interested in, right? And of course, the target at Target, right, was their point of sale systems, right? At the registers where customers are swiping their cards to be able to get that credit card information. Because that credit card information gets sold, at a premium on the black market. And so with that, with access to the point of sale devices, they dumped the memory, which contained the credit card information, and send that to a dump server, right? So you see how complicated this was. The point of sale systems did not have internet access. They couldn't just make a connection and transfer the data off from the point of sale systems. They actually had to send that to a dump server that was on the another system inside the Target network, and then use that system to exfiltrate the credit card data, right? All 11 gigabytes that were eventually stolen. Right, and hiding tracks. They weren't perfect at this. So Target had some FireEye malware detection, and the alarm was set off, but it wasn't acted upon, right? So this is what I'm talking about with, as great as these logging systems might be, they're not super useful unless the human sees and takes action on it, right? And these attackers also use covert channels, like I discussed a little bit ago. Within ICMP packets, that's ping. So if you've ever sent a ping to just determine if your computer was connected to the network or working properly, or if it could access something else, those packets have a certain structure, but there's also extra data you can put in there. So they used that as a covert channel to tell their remote servers when there was new data to transfer out and to set that up. Right. How can we protect ourselves? The standard advice, right? You got to have a security plan. You got to have your antivirus up to date, patching, backing up your systems regularly. But and importantly, you got to train your employees, and you got to be monitoring your systems, right? You can't just take logs. You got to actually monitor logs and act on them, right? You need strong network and system authentication, right? Maybe two-factor authentication has been big in the last couple of years. so that someone can't just take a foothold from just getting a password or something like that. Protect your wireless networks. Mentioned that. Remote access methods like VPNs, and implement physical security controls. Right. You don't want someone to just be able to walk into your server room and plug in a rubber ducky and walk out with the goods. Right. So that is my presentation. Hopefully, I didn't go over by too much. I thank you for your time and your attention. You can reach out to me at my email address or on Twitter, jamroots58.